Hello, everyone, and welcome today to our webinar on emerging technologies and biodiversity impact assessment. We are very excited to have you here today. There are over 900 registrants from 92 countries at least. So a great representation. We know you all won't be here in person because it's weird hours of the day or night for you, but we're so excited that you are joining us and registered for this webinar. Our host for the webinar is the International Association for Impact Assessment, or IAIA. My name is Bridget John from IAIA, and I'm joined by my colleague, Laura Lee Fortuny, who's working some magic in the background. If you see or hear anything today that you would like to tweet out or share on social media, please feel free to do that. You'll see our Twitter handle at II Network on the screen there, and you can use the hashtag IIWebinar as well. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with IAIA, just a few highlights of some of the things we have to offer for everyone available on our website. We do have a library of webinars that are available on demand to everyone, whether you're an II member or not. We've had ones on ESG, COVID impacts. There's a large number of them, biodiversity, resettlement, social, so you'll want to check those out. We also have some upcoming events. We are very, very excited to be gathering in person for the first time since 2019. We'll be meeting in Vancouver in early May for our annual conference, IAIA 22. Registration for that, if you're interested, is open through April 13th. You'll find more information about that on our website as well. And just recently announced is a symposium going to be hosted in Cape Town, South Africa, called Celsius 1.5 on impact assessment and climate change. We've just put out a call for training course proposals for that, and we'll have more information on registration and how to get involved soon on our website, so stay tuned. And we have online training courses available. That's a new thing for us. We've done in-person training courses at our conferences for years, and we still will be doing that in Vancouver, so you can check those on our website as well. But we do have just started this month offering some online training courses. We have another one coming up in June and more to be scheduled, so stay tuned for that as well. In terms of training, we have a program called Foundations of Impact Assessment. Is a training course that we offer through our professional development program. And that is an online self-paced training course. And what's unique about that is we offer some mentorship through that. You're paired with a mentor, you work with them one-on-one throughout the course. And we've gotten some really great feedback on that. The new course registration opens in April, I believe, and starts in June. And we have a wealth of downloadable free publications on our website. Whether you're looking for something quick, you can check out our fast tips. It's 5 important things to know and 5 important things to do about that particular topic, 2 pages, or getting into more in depth, like our best practice principles. We have some guidelines and handbooks available on our website. So visit the resources tab at IAIA.org to check those things out. Now, before we jump into the reason that you're all here, which is the webinar itself, just a few pieces of housekeeping for you today. At the top of your GoToWebinar control panel, you will see a white arrow in either an orange or a red box, and you can use that to minimize the control panel if it's getting in the way of you seeing the slides or the speakers' videos feeds. Feel free to pop that in. If you need the panel to ask a question or something later, you can always click that button and it'll pop it back out. Yes, indeed, we are recording our webinar today, and you will receive a link to that recording, everyone who registered, in the next day or two. And if you have questions, we will be taking questions towards the end of this discussion today, but don't feel that you need to wait. Feel free to pop those into the questions and chat panel. It's a gray bar in your control panel. Put those in there anytime. We'll be monitoring those on the back end and making sure those get to the panel towards the end. The slides that you'll see today will be available. That will also be in the link to the email that you receive with the link to the recording. You'll also get the link to the slides. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Zanowich. Very excited. She is the champion of this webinar. She's been working on this and getting this organized, and we're so glad that it came to fruition. So Deborah has been an II member for a long time, and she has held many different roles at II, but she is here today in her role as co-chair of the Washington area branch. So Deborah, I'm going to turn it over to you to make this happen.
Hi, thanks, Bridget. I really appreciate that. As Bridget mentioned, my name is Deborah Zanowich, and I am one of the two co-chairs of the Washington area branch of IAIA. We often call ourselves WAB, W-A-B. We'll be joined by the second co-chair that you see on your screen of WAB, Dr. Ariel Kushner, a little later in the webinar. He has over 30 years of consulting experience working in multiple assignments across environmental and social disciplines in a wide variety of sectors. And he'll come in with some closing comments a little later on in this webinar. He and I are so excited to introduce this webinar topic to you, and as well as the speakers. Before doing that, though, we want to thank the co-chairs of the IAIA Biodiversity section for collaborating with us in the early stages of planning this webinar. And a big thank you to IAIA HQ for co-hosting this event with us. When we were having our WAB sessions in person, so pre-COVID, we heard about some of the interesting biodiversity assessment and monitoring work that the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute is carrying out. We approached two of their program scientists to see if they would be willing to share some case studies as a way to show applications of emerging technologies and analysis in biodiversity assessment, mitigation, and monitoring. With this, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Jessica Dykman, whose research investigates species and ecosystem resilience to anthropogenic change. She collaborates with multiple stakeholder groups to implement research programs and share science-based recommendations to contribute to best practices for people and nature in sustainable infrastructure development. I'd also like to now introduce you to Dr. Tremaine Gregory, whose work focuses on the impacts of infrastructure development on wildlife and tropical forests, and identifies and tests best practice solutions to reduce those impacts. We'll turn the event over to Jesse and Tremi to lead us into this exciting field to talk about some case studies and to engage us through audience polling. Tremi, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and thank you to IAIA for joining us today. In fact, as Deborah said, we met a number of years ago, and at a Washington area branch event, I said, I think you need to meet my colleague, Jessie Dykman, because she's got some great technologies to share with your group. So today, if we can move to the next slide. So as Deborah said, my colleague Jessica and I work at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute in the Center for Conservation and Sustainability and in the Working Land and Seascapes program. And we recognize that humanity has needs on this earth, and deservedly so. And so we work to integrate conservation needs with sustainable development priorities so that humanity and biodiversity may coexist. And we use science to promote healthy and productive landscapes and seascapes that benefit people and nature. So today we're going to be talking about some different examples in which we have inserted technology to understand biodiversity. So you know a little bit about us, and we know a little bit about you from your registration. As was said at the beginning, you've come from over 90 countries, which just blew me away. I was looking at the list last night and so excited to be able to speak to you today. And we'd like to give you a little bit of voice in this webinar. We know you're on the other side of a partition, but we'd like to hear a little bit with you. And so throughout this talk today, we're going to be having various polls so you can tell us about yourselves. And we're going to start right now because you know a little bit about me and Jesse, and we don't know as much about you. So we're going to start with a poll about who you are, your role in biodiversity conservation. So which best describes your role in biodiversity conservation and sustainability? Please select all that apply. Are you a student? Are you in financing? Are you a researcher? Are you a consultant? or are you a developer? So I see that we have almost 50% participation so far. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to think about your identity in biodiversity conservation. I think I have worn many of these hats in my time in biodiversity conservation, and it's, although we can't be in person, it's exciting to know a little bit more about you and know with whom we are talking. Although hopefully the world will be back in person somewhat soon. So a lot of you have voted. I'm going to go ahead and share this in just a second. I'll give you 5 more seconds to vote. And let me make sure I do this correctly. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. And I'll share the results here. It looks like the majority of you are consultants. It's great to see that we also have some students in the audience. I love any opportunity to interact with students. We have plenty of researchers. Of course, those are our kin, so excited to see them too. People in financing and people in development. Thank you very much for participating in the poll and for taking the chance to get to know each other and for us to get to know you. And now we're going to do one more poll. Just to know a little bit more about what you do. So here we go. With which of the following types of infrastructure development do you work? And then you can select all that apply. So do you work in linear infrastructure? That can be obviously roads, rail, transmission lines, pipelines, anything that's goes in a long line. We also have power generation, so that includes fossil fuels and all the various types of renewables. We also have marine ports, something that we're going to be talking about today, and we'd like to know if that's something you work in too. Then we have waste management, and finally telecommunications. So who do we have here with us today? Let's see, we have 58% of you have voted. It's super exciting to see so much participation. I'll say that there are over 300 of you in the audience right now. That's really exciting to see. I feel a little bit lonely here in my son's bedroom office some days, so I'm glad to know I'm accompanied by over 300 people. I'll give you just a few more seconds to vote. It looks like most of you have voted, and I'll go ahead and close that and share our results. So it's interesting to see that many of you work in linear infrastructure, and then a lot working in power generation, in marine, plenty in waste management, not quite as many in telecommunications. So the shared work of everyone in the virtual room is really spanning a lot of different areas. And we're going to be using examples from a lot of these areas today. So thanks for participating in that poll. Okay, now we're going to move on to, let me stop sharing, there we go. And if we could move to the next slide. So we know that biodiversity is doing a lot of secretive things while we're trying to understand them. They're at night, they're doing a lot of stuff that it's really hard to understand. It's hard to see them. They're underwater doing a lot of amazing stuff. So we think that technology has the potential to really get at all the secret lives of biodiversity and help us really understand what they're doing. It's hard for us all to keep up with what's going on in technology all the time. And I think today my colleague Jessica is going to give some great examples of things that of technologies that really are approachable. It takes a little time to learn about them, but they're really the amount of information you can gather given the somewhat reasonable investment of time is just incredible. So now let's do one more poll to learn about the technologies that all of you are involved in. So, and then I'll tell you about what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to go to, don't worry, we won't be polling with this frequency throughout the whole webinar. You'll be able to relax a little bit, but we're just learning about each other here at the beginning. So let's learn about your use of technology. Which of the following technologies have you used in your biodiversity related work? Please go ahead and select all that apply. If you've never heard of them, no worries. I'm sure there are plenty of others in the audience that haven't. First, passive acoustic monitoring, also called bioacoustic monitoring or just acoustic monitoring. We also have machine learning. to classify images. So that's basically using AI to classify images. We also have AI to classify sounds. And then we have drones. We're talking about just aerial drones in this case, not drones that are used underwater. And then we have citizen science. So citizen science is not exactly a technology, but it's certainly a way to scale up data collection and to involve some of the most important stakeholders in biodiversity conservation, and those are local citizens. So a lot of you have voted. I'll give you just a few more seconds to see what you're familiar with. It just helps us to know where you're coming from when we do this presentation today. So I'll go ahead and close the poll and share it with you. So we have, many of you have used drones. That's really exciting to hear. Drones are definitely an area that is growing rapidly. Citizen science, that's extremely cool. That's the highest, the area that received the highest number of votes. And it's really, really an important area to work with local people. And cool to see a lot of you are working with passive acoustic monitoring, and then a little bit less with AI for classifying images and sound.
Tremi, I think
Thanks very much for participating in that poll. And so now I'm in the poll. I can't figure out how to close it. So let's see. Oops. If we can move to the next slide, Jessica, I guess. Okay, so I hope everyone can still hear me. Today we're going to be talking about new approaches to longstanding challenges, emerging technologies, and analyses for biodiversity impact assessment. If any of my colleagues at IAIA could help me remove the poll, I'm not able to do that myself right now, so we can go ahead with that. And my colleague Jessica is going to be talking about 4 different types of technology. She's going to be talking about, if we can move to the next slide, she'll be talking about the use of drones, the use of machine learning for image evaluation. As you see, we have the example there with fish. And she'll be using an example of machine learning to identify sounds. And then also a study in which we looked at different types of lighting technology. So I'm going to close us out with one last poll. Hopefully we won't get stuck in poll mode again. But we just want to know about your experience with drones and what you know about using drones. It sounds like a lot of you do use drones, so perhaps this won't be a difficult poll for you to answer. So can you complete this sentence? Data collected using drones can inform, and which of the following apply? Critical and natural habitat determination, biodiversity impact identification, biodiversity baseline studies, long-term population and ecosystem monitoring, or impact mitigation measures. What do you think? And as I say, go ahead and click all that that apply. And I'll just do a few more seconds on this one. Okay, I see this one's taking people a little bit more thought, which I can completely understand. These are a lot of different types of monitoring. And if you think about how drones collect data, maybe you can think about how they can contribute to these different areas. Okay, we have over 50% participation, so I'll go ahead and close. Looks like people are still thinking. I'll go ahead and close the poll though. And I'll share our results. So it looks like a lot of you chose from a lot of these categories, definitely particularly biodiversity baseline assessments. Well, I'm going to pass the microphone to my colleague, Jessie, so that she goes ahead and tells us what drones can do. Welcome, Jessie, and please feel free to add your questions as she speaks, because we're going to do a short question and answer section after every case study. We're going to be talking about 4 case studies today. So feel free to let the questions come on in and we'll address them as we go. Thank you, Jessie, and welcome.
Thanks, Tremi. Hi, everybody. I just want to start off by saying WebEx is new for me, so I'm managing a number of screens here. Hopefully, I've got everybody with me, but if I'm looking around, I'm just making sure I have my right screen and I'm looking in the right place. So if at any point you can't hear me, organizers, please let me know, or if the screen is not advancing, please do let me know. Hi, everybody. I am really happy to be here with Tremi and with Deborah and Ariel and Bridget and Laura Lee to be able to talk to you about some of this work that we do in our group at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute and with our Working Land and Seascapes initiative. So today at lightning speed, really, I will take you through very high-level overviews of case studies that showcase how we have used different applications of technology to support impact assessment and evaluation, as well as impact mitigation. So let's start with drones, one of the technologies that it seems like very many of you are familiar with. And so I'm sure most of you know that drones are just remotely operated vehicles. And today I'm going to be talking about aerial drones. So these can be fixed wing like airplanes or copter style like helicopters. And these drones can carry a variety of different high-tech sensors that can fly over very difficult to access places and collect huge amounts of data. So let's jump into our first case study. In 2010, a Peruvian company called Peru LNG built the first and only liquid natural gas port terminal to date in South America. And the company made efforts to integrate eco-engineering during infrastructure development. They built 2 main breakwaters indicated by arrows here. The further one out is 800 meters long and the closer one to shore is 200 meters long. And these incorporated natural materials. And the main purpose of the largest breakwater really was to dissipate that wave energy and allow the safe arrival of vessels. Well, the infrastructure certainly did what it was supposed to do. It created an area with calm waters for ships to dock. However, sorry, here we go. I'm getting used to this. The Peruvian coast is home to millions and millions of migratory seabirds. And so these conditions that were great for boats, for ships, were also optimal conditions for a variety of seabird species. And so they rapidly colonized the breakwaters. So in 2013, we partnered with the company and developed a biodiversity monitoring and assessment program, a BMAP, as we call them, to assess the impact and influence of the marine infrastructure on the surrounding area. And the marine BMAP has many protocols, but this one, led by the team on the right here, shown on the right, this one is focused on monitoring seabird populations in the area of the breakwaters. And the goal of this monitoring is really to be able to identify and implement solutions and best practices for the port sector in general, and to guide the company to actively contributing to biodiversity conservation. We initially tried traditional survey methods to evaluate seabird populations, but this was simply not an effective method given the vast numbers of seabirds present. And to complicate the situation, one of the species that colonized the area was the Humboldt penguin, pictured swimming here in the middle top and top right, nesting with 2 eggs. This species is an internationally red listed species. It's considered vulnerable. So this required especially accurate counts as part of biodiversity evaluations. So one solution that was proposed was to use drones. Drones have been successfully deployed to survey large areas and remote and difficult to access places like these breakwaters. They've been used to map forests in 3D. They've been used to count orangutan or chimpanzee nests in Borneo and Central Africa, respectively. They've even been used to detect illegal logging activity or illegal poaching activity. So we thought this might be a great tool to use here. So we invested in a Mavic dual-copter that's pictured here. And this has high resolution camera attached to it. And we began using this drone to monitor seabirds. This technology we were previously using a drone, but this particular technology had much longer battery life than previous models and really has allowed us to cover long stretches of beach with rocky little islands and outcrops to estimate the number of individual seabirds, and with a strong focus on birds that are native to Peru. So the use of drones in this case has really improved and refined our data collection while reducing our monitoring costs. We monitor monthly, and we've been monitoring monthly since 2017. And so to be able to do this effectively, drones have really been the only way. And the funds that we've saved from using this particular type of technology, we've been able to redirect towards other applied research activities. And for this monitoring protocol, we are using manual analysis of high resolution imagery to conduct seabird counts. Again, while this is much more accurate than traditional count methods, it does require significant time in the analysis stage in the desktop. But one outcome of improved seabird monitoring has been our ability to respond in a timely manner to requests for information about the resident population of the vulnerable Humboldt penguin. This population has actually increased from 60 individuals reported in 2012, shortly after construction of the breakwater, to nearly 2,000 individual penguins in 2021. So as a next step in this project, we're planning to utilize our thermal cameras, not just our high-res cameras, to improve counts of birds in the area. And we're also hoping to automate species recognition to use with the drone imagery. Some of the benefits of this technology in general, and particularly for this project, have been that drones are really excellent for being able to monitor abundant and gregarious species. This is true for migratory animals like birds, as well as large mammals in the Great Plains of North America, as well as across Africa. It's great. You can use it to monitor vegetation and fauna. So it has multiple applications and really large area coverage and particularly for difficult to access areas. Some of the considerations that we have to take into account are that the equipment is expensive and the analyses can be very time consuming, especially if they're not automated. And that automated analysis requires additional technical capacity, which is certainly achievable through partnerships, through collaboration, but does pose a potential barrier to its use. I'm going to stop there and turn it back over to Tremi to see if anyone has any questions or comments, because we would also love to hear from you about how you've used drones in your research.
And although Jesse just had a minute to talk about this technology, I wonder if you all could, if you were to look at that polling question again about the different types of data collection, I suppose you might be able to check all of those answers. So maybe a little bit of a trick question, but maybe the students in the audience caught on to that. So, I'm sorry. I'm learning about, speaking of technology, I'm learning about how to use the WebEx. So we have a lot of questions here today. Let's see what some of the questions are. Okay, so what measures are taken to ensure privacy of individuals and groups when using drones? What kinds of stresses are put on animals when drones are monitoring or observing them? This is a question all from the same individual. And I've heard that bears who had heart monitors showed very high levels of stress when monitored by drones. I had actually heard of that study also. Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, Tremi, I'll turn this back on you too, but I'll answer from what I know. But I'm going to let Tremi answer these questions as well, because she is just as much an expert in conservation technology as I am. So in our case, we are only focusing on monitoring animals, and vegetation. In our case, we don't collect any data on human populations using drones. If we are flying, I'm trying to think of other applications in which we've used drones. We've used drones to map, certainly to map vegetation and to note human settlements, but we don't have information through our drone imagery that would allow us to identify individuals or anything like that. So we do, if we were to collect information like that, the Smithsonian, like many research institutions, has a process for research that involves human subjects, and then we would go through our privacy office here and discuss how to maintain that data under very secure conditions. But yeah, in our case, we're not really collecting any data like that with our drones. Then in terms of disturbance to wildlife, yeah, that's definitely an issue. And as with all these technologies, you really need to consider sort of the combination of the value add of the use of that technology with the potential for disturbing the system that you want to monitor. So Tremi, do you want to make any additional comments about that piece?
Yeah, I would definitely. I was thinking exactly what you were saying. I'm actually a primatologist by training, and I spent many years chasing groups of monkeys around the forest. And it's unfortunate to use the word chasing, but the fact is that at first, when you study primates, you need to habituate them a little bit, get them accustomed to your presence, and I mean, it causes them some degree of stress, but the benefit, as Jesse says, can really be large if they're species that you know very little about. I think drones are getting increasingly quiet. Copters make a little bit more noise than the fixed wing drones, but they certainly, as they get quieter, it'll be easier to study animals. I think there are other mitigation methods people can use, like flying them higher, um, and using other mitigation measures to avoid impact. But I think the question is, what is the value add? And the animals may be stressed for a really brief amount of time. Obviously, if it's long-term stress, it's worse. And we feel that these kind of remote sensing technologies are much better than handling the animals and darting them and making measurements on them, which are also things that must be done sometimes when you really have to answer a specific question. But this kind of remote monitoring should be fairly low impact and over a pretty short period of time. And I just wanted to say that we produced a short video on this research that'll be shared in the comments. You can take a look at that and see a little bit of what we've done in terrestrial systems, also trying to use thermal cameras to study animals in forest, which is a really challenging context too. Okay, thanks everybody. We do have, maybe we can just go to one more question here. I think we have enough time. So this question is, how much is per flight of the drone? Let's see. Oh, how long, I think the question is, how long is each drone flight? And then are there any special requirements for the operator of the drone?
Great questions. So the length of the drone flight, I have learned, depends a lot on what weight it's carrying, so what sensor it's carrying. If it's carrying a really heavy sensor, the flight time is going to be shorter. It also depends on the pathway you want it to take and its trajectory. Apparently, straight shots and back shots are easier to do than sort of pathways that are circuitous. And so it's hard, and it depends on the equipment and the battery life. And so that's a really hard question to answer. Tremi may be able to give a more general answer, but it's a really hard question for me to answer. Tremi, do you have any more specifics?
On training, right, is what we're talking
about.
about.
Well, on training, so on the training component, So we use our drones a lot in Peru, in our research in Peru. And in Peru, you have to have a license to operate a drone. And so all of our drone operators have been licensed, and the requirements are different by country. And so that's something else that if you're considering using this particular technology, as well as the sensors, because the sensors also are very high tech and may have maybe a technology that may be restricted in certainly through imports or like through importing or through other regulations. So it's really important to investigate the rules and regulations surrounding the use of drones, permissions for using drones and requirements for being able to use drones, as well as the sensors that you're carrying for every context that you want to use them in.
Okay, great. We have quite a few other questions about drones. I'm gonna move them to the end just to make sure that we have time for your other case studies, and I hope we'll be able to get to those. But a lot of interesting questions about automated identification of species. But then again, I think some of your other case studies are going to get to that a little bit. So lucky you, everyone. We're going to do another poll. And this one is going to be about our next topic, image recognition. So here we go. I'm going to launch the poll. So again, complete the sentence. Data collected using image recognition can inform. And then we have a lot of our same choices that we did the last time. Critical and natural habitat determination, biodiversity impact identification, biodiversity baseline studies, and then long-term population and ecosystem monitoring, and finally monitoring impact mitigation measures and their efficacy. So we're getting a lot of people voting on our different options here. So again, this is image recognition, taking images of different species of animals and seeing what species they are, using automated identification tools to identify the species, or using image recognition for other purposes. I guess I'm giving away the answers here a little bit. Okay, so we've got more than half of you have voted. So I'll go ahead and, oh, we're up to almost 60% here. I'll go ahead and close and share the results. So it looks like we've had people selecting all of the categories here at different rates, a little bit fewer people selecting impact mitigation measures. So I'm going to go ahead to Jessie and help her answer, or have her help us answer this question. So there we go.
Thanks.
Okay, so go ahead, Jessie, take it away. Tell us about image recognition.
Thanks very much, Tremi. Okay, and I love to see those answers because yes, I agree with all of you that there are a lot of different uses for image recognition. So very briefly, and again, I apologize that these are all such high overviews, but we have a short period of time, but as Tremi mentioned, we'll be sharing some links in the chat about where you can find some more information on these projects, and we can certainly direct you to other projects as well, because there are a lot of other great groups working on some of these issues, including many of you, I'm sure. So as an overview, image recognition is simply the automated recognition of patterns and regularities or irregularities in data. And so in the context of machine vision or machine learning, it's the ability of software to identify objects, places, writing, actions, people in images. And image recognition has a lot of applications in biodiversity science, particularly for monitoring and evaluation. Any of you who've used the LeafSnap app to identify plants, or who have used the Merlin app to identify photos of birds, are using image recognition for biodiversity. There are platforms like iNaturalist, which I know a lot of people use, and Wildlife Insights, which is used for camera trapping data, that are developing image recognition algorithms to identify species in photos. It's challenging, but it has great potential to contribute to monitoring and evaluation. And our general lack of knowledge about biodiversity in really remote areas is a major challenge to quantifying impacts of development. Combine that with the difficulty of accessing these areas, it's the perfect storm for poor biodiversity baselines But as we here all know, this biodiversity baseline data is essential for understanding whether there are new species, whether there are data deficient species, threatened species, species of economic importance that we need to know about to propose mitigation measures, and for developing restoration strategies in the long term and to be able to monitor effectiveness of those. So let's talk about a case study where we're using image recognition to build better biodiversity baselines. I can advance my screen. There we go. I probably don't need to tell all of you this, but fish are excellent indicators of the overall health of ecosystems. They are sensitive to changes in water quality. They're also really diverse and showy, and they often have high sociocultural value and economic value as sources of food, of recreation, of income. And so therefore, fish are really of key importance for food security for local communities, important stakeholders in a lot of infrastructure development projects. And many fish species and communities respond rapidly to environmental disturbances, including all of these anthropogenic activities that can alter hydrology and water quality. But monitoring fish requires us to be able to identify species. And in diverse places like the tropical forests of the world, it can be really hard to tell species apart. In the Amazon, for example, many species don't have common names in local languages. And those that do are often lumped under the same names, which isn't necessarily useful for a monitoring program. So one way to monitor fish populations in the long term would be to provide tools and to work with local communities to empower them to monitor fish. So in 2018, we partnered with an oil company in a very remote part of the northern Amazon to study fish diversity and to be able to establish a solid baseline and to try to develop a protocol to be able to monitor fish populations in the long term in an area where a pipeline was to be built. So to do this, you can see my team on the right here that helped carry this out. We partnered with a number of organizations, including the Smithsonian Data Science Lab, to develop an image recognition tool to classify species of fish from photos. And so again, in this context, our specific goal was to develop a tool to classify or recognize species in photographs that can be used as part of a participatory monitoring or citizen science protocols to detect future changes in fish populations. And as a first step, we needed to sample fish in the area. So we used various traditional sampling methods, and I'm sure many of you have employed yourselves. For each individual captured, we take measurements, we take tissue samples to be able to do molecular, like barcoding data collection, and we also preserve specimens. In this case, perhaps the most important component of this project was that we photographed every single individual that we captured, and you can imagine that was a lot. And we took, we needed to photograph these and to identify them so that they could be used as training data in developing that image recognition tool. So before we go to the next step, I just want to give a really high level overview of how machine learning works. And I will also preface this by saying that I am not a data scientist. So I partner with data scientists to help develop these tools. So you're going to get my perspective and my explanation of how machine learning works. So this image here, I hope that you can see it sort of flashing. If you can't, then I will do my best to explain it. But for a computer, any image is really just a matrix of pixels. And so each of these numbers that you see flashing here is assigned a value from 0 to 255 that describes the intensity of the pixel at that particular point. And these numbers, although they don't make sense to us, when we do image classification, they are the only inputs available to the computer. So the idea is that you give the computer this matrix of numbers, and it will generate numbers that describe the probability that the image in the photo belongs to a certain class. Now, at a very high level, again, This is the analysis that we employed to develop the image recognition tool in this particular case study. We used convolutional neural networks, or much easier, CNNs. And again, at a very high level, CNNs take an image and they run it through a series of layers or filters that include a lot of training data. And that training data, again, are identified images. So it runs a single image through a filter of already identified images here to get an output. And the output can be a single class, like species A, or it can be a probability that it belongs to a certain class. So it can be 50% probability that this species in this photo belongs to species A, or 30% probability that it belongs to species B. The more training data that you have, the more accurate is the output or the resulting classification of your CNN. So in our case, to develop our image classifier model, we used over 3,000 images, and we split them 80% to build our CNN, our convolutional neural net. So there were, 80% of our images were used as training data, and then 20% of our images were used to test that model. And a trained machine learning algorithm can use that matrix of pixels and that CNN to classify objects in an image. And so this is kind of what an output might look like. You can see here that this model that we ran on this photo identified this object in the image at the bottom here as a fish with 86% probability. It also identified a cell phone and a person, and I don't even know what's in the background there. But in our case, in order to improve our model, one of the things we did was to develop a masking tool, because often this background that we have in these images can be confusing to the algorithm. So to improve the accuracy of our classification tool, we developed this masking tool on top of the image recognition tool to remove the background and improve the accuracy of our tool. And our results. So again, we used over 3,000 images, and we collected many of these from the field, but because we're at the Smithsonian, we also had the benefit of being able to go to the National Museum of Natural History and take photos of specimens in the collection in order to bolster the number of images that we had, excuse me, in our training data. And we used our masking tool, and with the image recognition model developed using the CNN, we developed the first version of a tool for species classification for Amazonian fish. This figure on the right here is what's known as a confusion matrix, and this is showing basically, if you have a nice diagonal line like the one shown here, you can see that it's pretty accurate at identifying species. And in this case, we had, depending on the genus, accuracy of anywhere from 88 to 99% accuracy across these 33 genera that correctly classify photos of fish to the genus level. Now, one thing that we really need is more training data, more photos, and using more photos, we can continuously refine this model. And currently, right now, we are in the process of finalizing our online app for using this, and we're finalizing our first scientific manuscript to explain these results. I'll also point out this image right here. This is known as a heat map, and this heat map in these areas of bright orange, it's showing you where the computer algorithm is focusing to identify that particular species. So these heat maps are also really useful tools to see if you need to add a masking tool to black out your background, or to see which parts of the fish the computer recognizes as most important for identifying it. So that was a really high-level overview, and thanks for bearing with me. But in general, the benefits of using image recognition as a tool for developing biodiversity baselines and for long-term monitoring are that it can really provide a standardized approach to identifying species, which can be a real challenge, particularly in citizen science and community monitoring protocols. And it really helps to reduce that bias. There's still going to be an innate bias in machine learning tools, but it can reduce that human bias substantially. A couple considerations to consider before using image recognition or before setting out to develop an image recognition tool is that it really requires a lot of data. So for all of you who are out there collecting data, please take photos. Take photos of as many things as you can. And there are many initiatives in progress right now to try to develop image recognition tools for various taxonomic groups. And these kinds of data are going to be crucial to developing really accurate monitoring protocols and machine learning tools. And just as with drones, it does require technical capacity to develop the model. So partnerships are great for something like that.
Thank you so much, Jessie. Yeah, I work a lot with camera traps, so I know that this automated image recognition is something that's been stumping us camera trappers for a long time because the photos are not taken in a standardized way. Unfortunately, the animals don't know to stand just right, but it's becoming more and more useful in automated evaluations of all the hundreds of thousands of images that we end up with. And thanks for the mention of citizen science, because it sounds like we have a lot of audience members that are working with citizen scientists, and these kinds of tools can be really useful for that when they take images in their work. Okay, well, we have a lot of questions. One that is popping up again and again is about the different tools that you're using. So so people are asking, for example, can you share the name of the apps that you mentioned? Maybe repeat it again. If you have a chance to even type it there in the chat, that could be cool, because a lot of people are asking that question. Let's see, another question that is being asked is, let's see, this person makes the comment that another example of image recognition may be CPCE, which is coral point count, that is used, or it's used for marine benthic coral reef analysis. Is that something that you've ever heard of? I can imagine that with all different types of images, this can be an option.
Yeah, excuse me, there are many different applications. I haven't heard of that one in particular. I don't work too much with marine fauna, but there are a number of applications out there, and they are really improving in their accuracy all the time. And so it's a matter of if you think you're beginning something, if you think there isn't an image recognition tool out there yet, be sure to look for it first, because there are a number of groups who are really, this is a fastly moving field. And so a number of groups are really working hard to advance this for many different taxonomic groups. And the great thing, I guess I'll just add, the last thing I'll add to that piece is that if you've already built a model for a taxonomic group, then, if you, let's say our model for Amazonian fish, our training data is very specific, and it's very specific to species found in the area we were monitoring. However, to be able to use the same tool in a different geographic area with different species, all you need to do is add that training data to the model, and then you can make adjustments to the algorithm if necessary. But once that model is there, then it takes fewer tweaks to be able to use it in different places across the taxonomic group.
Okay, cool. And let's see, this is a question that sort of relates to that, is after the tool is developed, do you rely on your team to take pictures to monitor the population, or are you only relying on citizen science in this example?
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, in this particular example, we have not yet been able to implement the participatory monitoring piece of it for various reasons. But I will say that our plan was to work exclusively with communities to do that, because the site is really hard to access. It takes days to get there. And so we had developed a protocol, specifically working with local communities and this very specific ways in which they fish. And so we had integrated their knowledge, their traditional techniques and methods for fishing, and this idea of using this tool to collect the data. And so it was going to be primarily community driven, was the plan. Hopefully one day we'll have the opportunity to follow through and learn some lessons.
Yeah, but certainly the idea is to start with standardized images, but then move towards a much less and less standardized images. It's the
Yeah,
not standardized images that are the most valuable, but then also the most problematic.
yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's one of the reasons that we developed that masking tool to help remove the background and help the computer really focus just on the image that we want.
Right. Okay, great. Well, we're getting plenty of questions about drones still too, and about this, but I think we should go ahead and move with to your next example, so we have plenty of time for it. And this is going to be an example related to this one, but this is going to be with sound, using machine learning for sound. And we're going to go to another polling question. You might have noticed that our image recognition question was a bit of a trick question too. If you think about it, a lot of those applications that we listed could be used with image recognition. So let's see what you think about passive acoustic monitoring and sound recognition in different applications. So again, completing the sentence, data collected using passive acoustic monitoring can inform critical and natural habitat determination, biodiversity impact identification, biodiversity baseline studies, long-term population and ecosystem monitoring, or the efficacy of different impact mitigation measures. So let's see, we've got lots of voting going on here, going up over 30%. And again, this is passive acoustic monitoring, also called bioacoustic monitoring, also called PAM or just acoustic monitoring. Basically evaluating sounds and the vocalizations that different animals make. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll here in just a second. Let's see if we have a few more people voting. I'll give you 5 seconds. And okay, I'll go ahead and close and share. And it looks like a lot of you have voted for biodiversity baseline studies, but then also long-term population and ecosystem monitoring. So let's go ahead and hear from the expert about passive acoustic monitoring. And go ahead and take it away, Jessie.
Thank you, Trum. Okay, so audio or sound classification is the process of listening to and analyzing audio recordings. And modern modern artificial intelligence technology has used soundscape classification to develop virtual assistants like Siri and Alexa. Sorry if I turned yours on by saying those words, to automate species recognition and to create text-to-speech applications. And it really just involves machine learning to classify sounds and to predict the category of that sound, much like image recognition. And so the very similar tools and same tools are really used to classify sounds as are used to classify images. And while sound classification has been less used to classify environmental sounds, its use is growing. And in the context of biodiversity monitoring and evaluation, sound classification has the potential to detect rare species, to monitor gregarious ones, and to inform long-term environmental change through the detection of different types of sounds in an environment. Oh, and I forgot to let you listen to this beautiful music. Sorry, not music, sounds from the environment. You may not be able to hear them. Okay, so In many habitats, animals can be really difficult to find. And this is problematic for impact assessments and for monitoring and evaluation that often just lasts a few days. The good news is that many of these difficult to see animals produce sounds. And this is true across many taxonomic groups, including birds, mammals, amphibians, and even invertebrates. Passive acoustic monitoring involves the use of an automated device to record sounds in the environment. And there are many types of devices available for this today, and it's important to select one that's appropriate to address the project, the habitat, and the budget that you have for your project. PAM is really an excellent remote sensing method. PAM, or passive acoustic monitoring, is an excellent remote sensing method because it generates a permanent record of species belonging to all these different taxonomic groups at any place and time. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of soundscapes. So we use passive acoustic monitoring to monitor what we call soundscapes, and the field for doing this is called ecoacoustics, as Tremi mentioned. So this, what I'm showing you right here, is a spectrogram, and a spectrogram is just a visualization of sound. And you can think of this sound as a 3D space or a soundscape, much like a landscape, except it's just composed of all the sounds in the environment. And across the bottom here, we have the three main categories of sounds. The first one is known as geophony, and these are sounds produced by the physical environment, like a stream or storms. Another one is biophony, and these are the sounds produced by animals in an environment. And the final one is anthrophony, and these are the technological sounds, the sounds produced by humans. In 2014, we partnered with an oil company that was initiating new drilling operations in a very remote area. I feel like I say that with every project, very remote, but it's true. We work a lot in remote areas in southeastern Peru to use passive acoustic monitoring to understand how the behavior of terrestrial fauna in the area of influence will be directly influenced by the activities associated with development of the drilling platform and the associated infrastructure. The hydrocarbon concession overlapped a national protected area that provided resources to 10 indigenous communities living in the buffer zone. So this was a really important high sensitivity area that was really important to get accurate biodiversity data from. So we entered with the goal of finding ways to minimize the impacts and of really understanding how to measure those impacts. And this team on the right here was instrumental in carrying out this project. So you can see a little bit of this habitat in the terrain in these photos. The topography is incredible, making access and traversing this area really difficult. So doing traditional point counts by just walking around was extremely difficult. So passive acoustic monitoring in this case was an essential tool to be able to collect sufficient data to establish baselines and monitor species throughout the life of the project. We entered in 5 phases of the development of the natural gas platform, and we were able to install 2 recorders at 5 different distances from the platform. We programmed these recorders, and in this case, we started in 2014. So in this case, we were using, this was before the development of a lot of the devices that exist today. So we were using cell phones with an app that recorded for 1 minute every 10 minutes for 24 hours a day. And that's a pretty standard duty schedule for passive acoustic monitoring. And let me just show you a couple recordings that we took, or that we received, that we collected from this area. This first one I'll play for you. I hope you can hear it. It's a little quiet.
Oh, yes, we can hear it, sir.
So this soundscape, this recording, was taken at a site that was 1,000 meters away from the platform. And this was at 6 a.m. during drilling operations. And I have these boxes here. The green box is showing a lot of the biophony. And these are the frequencies at which biophony, or the sounds of animals, mostly occurs. And this is really mostly birds and amphibians and some insects. And the red box at the bottom is showing where most anthrophony sounds occur. So most of human-generated sounds occur in the area of this red box. In this particular case, we did not really have any anthrophony sounds at 1,000 meters from the platform, but you can see that there are species that call in these frequencies. And all these marks, or these marks on the spectrogram, are showing the patterns made by the different sounds that different species produce. And each pattern typically represents a different species. So this one's great, sounds great. It sounds active with a lot of biophony. Same day, at a site 100 meters from the drilling platform, and this is the spectrogram that we see, and I hope you can kind of hear the sound in the background, although there's not much to hear. Here are those same boxes, and you can see there's a lot less activity where the biophony is, and a lot more activity where that anthrophony is. And if you think back on the previous recording and the species that call in the area of anthrophony, or where that overlap is, you can imagine that those species in particular might be particularly affected by noises produced by activities like this. So with this sampling, with passive acoustic monitoring, you can collect a lot of data, because the recorders don't have to eat, they don't have to go to the bathroom, they don't have to sleep. They can just record as long as you need them to, as long as batteries and memory cards last. So we collected well over 100,000 one-minute recordings, and then thought, oh wow, what do we do with this? Well, fortunately, and now today more than before, there are a number of tools available for acoustic analysis. In particular, we use a program called Arbimon that is freely available on the internet, and we can put a link to it in the chat, but it's also down here. And Arbimon is a great platform because it allows for manual revision as well as classification of focal species in your recordings. It also has tools for soundscape analyses. I'm not going to talk about soundscape level analyses today because I don't have time, but that's also a really fantastic tool for ecoacoustics. Okay, so the tools, if I were to do manual revision of all these recordings, I would spend basically every day, 8 hours a day, going through these recordings one by one, and it would take me over a year to manually analyze them. So our ability to use these tools through a platform like Arbimon and utilize pattern matching and random forest models and CNNs to assist with species classification and sounds is key. But I will show you what you can do with manual analysis. So here's an example from this particular site. We did manual analysis of a subset of 600 recordings out of over 100,000. So clearly we're missing some information here. But even with a subset of analyses, you can get pretty interesting data that can provide information key to informing activities, impact activities. And in this case, we were able to use that data to figure out that distance from the platform was a significant factor in detecting amphibians in this case. But if we use species classification, we are able to create a model, a machine learning model that can identify the pattern of a call. Again, the same principles that underlie image recognition model, to identify focal species and where they are active across all 100,000 plus recordings. So to do this, we used Arbimon and we created a model for each focal species. And I'm showing you one example of how this might work. This is the white-browed antbird. And while I don't have time to go into any details, there are a lot of tutorials available for acoustic analyses on the RBMON platform, as well as for other tools. They're available on, I don't know if any of you have heard of Wild Labs, but Wild Labs is a great resource for conservation technology, and we can maybe put that in the chat as well. Lots of tutorials on how to do species classification through sound using these tools. And once you create that species classification model, then you can analyze and compare activity patterns of different species. So in this case, we chose 11 focal species based on various criteria. And what we found using the classification tool and subsequent analysis is that activity patterns varied greatly across species. Some species were relatively common at all sites, while other species were limited to just a single site. Of the 11 species that we analyzed, only the slate-colored grosbeak, shown here, demonstrated a significant relationship between the distance and the total number of detections. And so that indicated to us that this might be an important species to include in long-term monitoring projects, or sorry, long-term monitoring for this particular project. So jumping into the benefits. Species classification using sound and passive acoustic monitoring is really a fantastic tool to establish biodiversity baselines and for long-term detection and monitoring of vocal or loud sound producing species. They're not all vocal, right? Some of them produce sound using different parts of their body. But again, a number of considerations we have to take into account. One of them is that, as with the image recognition, the number of recordings matters, and then the amount of training data matters. And so if we are looking at species that are not well known, particularly from highly diverse sites like the Amazon, we need experts to be able to initially identify those species in order to be able to build those classification tools. And that feels so brief. I could talk about it for an hour alone, I think, but we don't have time for that today, unfortunately. So, Tremi.
Thank you, Jessie. I don't get bored hearing about passive acoustic monitoring. Every time I get excited about it all over again. And even for thinking about things like species that rarely vocalize, like maybe bush dogs or some species that is not even known to be in an area, the potential to use recordings from other locations to see if it's showing up in the hundreds of thousands of hours of recordings that one might collect. I shared some of those links in the chat. I'm sorry, I shared the RBMON link 10 times, but I guess you all really know what that link is now. Again, the WebEx technology is giving me some challenges. So and then I also shared the link for the Wild Labs network, so that can be a really good resource for everyone. And then we're also sharing links to a couple of papers that Jessie and the team she worked with have put out on this technology that may be helpful for you to look at. Some blog posts also about using a passive acoustic monitoring. So let's just go to one question, because I want to, well, let's see, we have a couple of questions here that you have. I want to make sure we have time for the last example, which is a super exciting example. But one question was about theft of the equipment. I think it might be cool to talk about this little guy in the picture here and how much they cost.
Yes, that's a great question. Obviously, theft is always a potential issue. In this case, this is an audio moth, and audio moths are, to date, as far as I know, the least expensive monitors, or the least expensive sensors for acoustic monitoring. And we've used them in a number of projects, including the one pictured here, which is actually to detect fish splashing, to try to understand when and monitor when spawning occurs for fish in this particular river. So they only cost, well, thanks to supply chain issues, I think they're up to around $80 right now. You can also 3D print them and make them yourselves if you are so inclined or have the capacity to do that. But they're also small, you know, it fits in the palm of your hand. So you can place it in inconspicuous areas to help reduce theft.
Yeah, they're not nearly as sensitive as camera traps for theft, and because they can collect data while they're close to the ground or high up above the ground, you can hoist them up in a tree where nobody can see them. I would guess. So let's see. Well, we have a question about bats. I think this is the only. I'm sorry that there are lots of questions, but I think that this is one that we should get to. Just can you talk a little bit about how bats are detected with passive acoustic monitoring? This number of the audience is saying that automated ID is not yet very reliable due to the complexity of bat calls.
Yeah, so I don't work too much with bats myself, and I actually record at frequencies that are below most bats. So if you are trying to use acoustic monitoring specifically to focus on bats, then you should be recording at much higher frequencies than we do. There are Kaleidoscope is one tool that has made some advances in being able to automatically detect some species of bats. As is the case with most things, we have advanced much more in our ability to classify species in temperate areas as opposed to tropical high biodiversity areas. And other than that, I don't have too much more information to share, but it's a challenge. Classifying species continues to be a challenge, especially in high biodiversity areas across taxonomic groups. But the more training data we are able to collect, the better those models are getting.
Right, and just as there can be declines in different morphological features, like pelage color and stuff like that, there can be declines in vocalization patterns and things like that. So a species from the southernmost part of its range may not be, a recording from there may not be usable for a northern part of their range, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so let me just put our last polling question here. I just want to give you one chance to think about lighting technology before Jessie talks about it. I'll run through it quickly so that we get time for her to talk about her study. So how can new lighting technology contribute to reduced impacts of infrastructure development and operation? So can it reduce energy use? Can it minimize impacts to invertebrate fauna? Can it minimize impacts to vertebrate fauna? Can it minimize impacts on plant biodiversity? Or can it reduce pathogen transmission in humans? So let's see if we can get some votes on this question. I'll just leave it up for a little bit so that we have time for the presentation. I'll say that this example can be applicable anywhere in your own household. So take note if you haven't thought so much about lighting recently. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll so that we have time for the presentation, and I'll share the results. And we had votes in every category, a little bit fewer votes in the reduction of pathogen transmission in humans. So let's see what Jessie has to say about artificial lighting at night.
Okay, I am going to fly through this example to the best of my ability because I know we are running behind on time. So artificial light at night, we're really switching gears here. And this map right here is showing the extent of artificial light at night in my part of the world. And you can see it's extensive and it's increasing every year. And the impacts of light pollution on many different groups of wildlife and even plants are really well documented. So electrification comes with every development project, and what can we do to minimize the potential impacts of that? This image is potentially very familiar to any of you who've worked on a new infrastructure project. Many species navigate by moonlight, especially insects. So when you introduce big moons to the landscape, it's particularly problematic for insects, but also for people who are expected to work under those lights. So what can we do to minimize that problem? Well, traditionally, scientists have used light to attract insects, to study them. So how can we harness that knowledge to mitigate the impacts of lights? Well, I had a fantastic team here that helped me pull off a study in northern Peru near the border with Ecuador to try to figure out how to mitigate the impacts of lighting, artificial light at night, on wildlife. And we used 3 different types of lights. And that these lights differed in their spectral distributions. And the most important difference here is that the amber light, using an amber filter on an LED base, reduced the blue content of light, which is known to have negative impacts on wildlife. So we set up these traps using 3 different light types and a control in the forest. We collected insects. We, in fact, captured more than 700 morphospecies and over 15,000 individuals in a month of sampling. And we found that many fewer species and many fewer individuals were attracted to lights with the amber filter, the orange filter. And these are pretty convincing results, but they're also significant, statistically significant, not just raw data. And white light attracted more of virtually every group. But another question we wanted to address was whether yellow and amber lights could preferentially attract disease vectors. And that would be an important reason for a company not to use them, despite the reduced impact on insects in general. And so we discovered that, in fact, white lights also attracted more disease vectors. But an important thing that we found, and somewhat unexpected, was that amber lights attracted the fewest of all groups except bioluminescent groups like fireflies and click beetles. And this highlights that, unfortunately, no one solution can solve all of our problems. So based on this study, we developed tangible and actionable management recommendations for minimizing artificial light at night impacts on insects in new infrastructure projects. And these recommendations have been broadly shared with private sector partners, and we recently published a paper on it as well. So the benefits of using new LED technology and a little bit of innovation by applying these filters to control the spectra can both reduce energy use and mitigate wildlife impacts. And there's no silver bullet, unfortunately, but again, we need to think about value add and try to balance the needs of infrastructure development and wildlife in our projects. And that was super fast, but I know we want to get to Ariel and hear Ariel's wrap up here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessie. Like I say, I think that we could all think about lighting in our own houses, and do we need to keep lights on, especially outside, all night long, or could we change the filters on those lights so that they're not as impactful? And we still have lots of questions in the chat. We'll have our email addresses. Questions in the Q&A, and we'll have our email addresses shared in the chat so that you can email us and ask us more about this. Also, we'll share a link to a paper that Jessie just published last year on this topic of lighting, and we hope you'll take a look at those, and please feel free to contact us if you have a biodiversity problem that needs a solution that maybe technology can solve, or that maybe traditional monitoring methods can solve. We have over 20 years of experience doing this kind of work in tropical forests, us and our teams. So we look forward to hearing Ariel's wrap up, and I'm sorry that we can't get to those final questions, but we're really, really excited to have had such a great audience today, over 350 people by the end, and it's been a great opportunity. Thanks so much to IAIA and all that helped organize this session. Jessie, would you like to say any final things?
Yes, thank you very much, and over to Ariel, and I will stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Tremaine and Jessica, for a fascinating presentation. There is no doubt that the faster growth of scientific research and discovery in recent years has been accelerated by existing technologies and new methodological approaches. This is visible not only in impact mitigation and biodiversity monitoring and evaluation, as presented by Jessica today, but also in other scientific fields, like the use of drones in archaeological field research or in applied fields such as precision agriculture or site-specific crop management, SSM. This is an example of the SSM approach helped farmers know how much irrigation water is needed across hundreds of GPS established points in their fields and apply water management only in specific locations rather than the need for irrigating the entire field. In the near future, it will be interesting to see also the applicability of technological advances in ESG monitoring as well. I feel personally they could have a positive effect on the monitoring of certain ESG, environmental and social key performance indicators. That is, they could help scratch beneath the surface of the current use of ESG KPIs, mainly for corporate or public reporting purposes. Something that will also help build more stakeholder confidence in impact and risk assessment, which, by the way, it is an important theme in our IAIA conference in Vancouver in May 4th. Once again, thank you, Tremaine and Jessica, for your contributions today. For the audience, don't forget to join us at the next conference in Vancouver. And now, Brigitte, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ariel, and thank you to the entire team, Deborah and Jessica and Tremi and Ariel, for a fantastic webinar. Such great participation, so many questions we didn't even get a chance to get to, and such great ones too. So I just want to, as we thank the panelists, but I also want to thank you, our participants, for joining us today and for being here, for participating in all those polls and giving us a sense of your perspective as well. I just wanted to let you know and remind you that you will be getting a link to the recording. That should come out in a day or two. That will also include the link to that on that same page will include the handouts for the slides. And also we'll pull together all of the links that were shared in the chat session. I know they were kind of coming fast and furious, and it's kind of difficult to check on those and watch the webinar at the same time. So we'll pull those all together for you and include those as a handout as well. So there will be a very brief survey that you will receive as you exit the webinar today. So we hope that you will take a few minutes to participate in that. It's very helpful to us. You'll also have an opportunity to share any ideas for future webinar topics that you are interested in, or to ask any remaining questions that you have. So with that, we know that your time is incredibly valuable. We hope that you found this webinar valuable as well. See you next time.